Welcome to Artificial Fluency Podcast. I'm Emma Thompson, and I'm thrilled to guide you through today's advanced listening practice session, designed specifically for B1 and B2 learners who are ready to take their English comprehension to the next level. Today's episode is titled Master Advanced English Conversations Effortlessly, and that's exactly what we're going to achieve together. If you're at the B1 or B2 level, you've already built a solid foundation in English, but you might find yourself struggling with more sophisticated conversations, discussions that involve abstract concepts, cultural nuances, implied meanings, and complex grammatical structures. What sets today's episode apart is that we're moving beyond basic communication into the realm of truly fluent English comprehension. You'll hear conversations at natural native speaker pace, complete with interruptions, cultural references, idiomatic expressions, and the kind of sophisticated vocabulary that separates intermediate learners from advanced speakers. Over the next hour, we'll explore 5 challenging yet fascinating areas of advanced English listening. First, we'll dive into academic and intellectual discussions, where speakers debate complex topics using sophisticated vocabulary and argumentation. Then we'll tackle professional presentations and business strategy meetings with technical terminology and formal language structures. Next, we'll explore cultural conversations about art, literature, and social issues that require understanding of context and subtext. After that, we'll practice with emotional and personal discussions that involve several psychological insights and relationship dynamics. Finally, we'll work on understanding news analysis and current events discussions with their rapid pace and specialized vocabulary. Each segment is designed to challenge different aspects of your listening comprehension. You'll need to follow complex arguments, understand implied meanings, pick up on emotional subtleties, and process information at the speed of educated native speakers. But don't worry, I'll guide you through each conversation with strategic insights and vocabulary explanations. My goal today is to help you develop what I call effortless comprehension, the ability to understand sophisticated English conversations without conscious effort, just as you do in your native language. This requires training your brain to process English at a deeper, more intuitive level. Are you ready to transform your listening skills and join the ranks of truly advanced English speakers? Let's embark on this exciting journey together.
Let's begin with academic and intellectual discussions, the kind of sophisticated conversations you'd hear in university seminars, think tanks, or among educated professionals discussing complex topics. These conversations require you to follow abstract reasoning, understand specialized vocabulary, and track multi-layered arguments. Listen to this discussion between 2 professors debating the impact of artificial intelligence on human creativity. Pay attention to how they build their arguments, use evidence, and engage with each other's points. I've been reflecting on your recent paper about AI's impact on creative industries, and while I found your economic analysis compelling, I'm not entirely convinced by your central thesis that artificial intelligence fundamentally threatens human creativity. That's interesting, Margaret. Could you elaborate on your concerns? I thought I presented fairly robust evidence showing how AI-generated content is already displacing human creators in multiple sectors: graphic design, music composition, even journalistic writing. Oh, I don't dispute the displacement phenomenon you've documented. That's clearly occurring. My skepticism centers more on the philosophical implications of your argument. You seem to conflate commercial creative work with creativity itself as if they were synonymous. That's a fair critique, actually. But surely you'd agree that when AI systems can produce work that's indistinguishable from human-created content, and do so at exponentially faster rates, This poses profound questions about the nature and value of human creative expression. Absolutely, it raises profound questions, but I'd argue it's precisely these questions that might actually enhance human creativity rather than diminish it. Throughout history, technological disruptions have forced artists to explore new territories, to discover what makes human expression uniquely valuable. You're thinking of photography's impact on painting, I assume. The way Impressionism emerged partly as a response to the camera's ability to capture realistic images. Exactly, and jazz emerging from the intersection of recorded music and live performance, or how digital tools didn't eliminate traditional craftsmanship, but created entirely new art forms. I suspect we're witnessing the beginning of a similar renaissance. That's a fascinating perspective, though I wonder if you're being overly optimistic. The scale and speed of AI advancement seems qualitatively different from previous technological shifts. We're not just talking about new tools, we're discussing systems that can mimic the entire creative process. But that's precisely my point. If AI can replicate what we currently consider creativity, then perhaps we need to expand our definition of what human creativity actually encompasses. Maybe we've been thinking too narrowly about creative expression all along. This academic discussion demonstrates several key characteristics of sophisticated intellectual discourse. Complex argumentation structure. Notice how each speaker built upon the other's points, acknowledged valid criticisms, and refined their positions based on the dialogue. Sophisticated vocabulary. Terms like compelling, robust evidence, conflate, synonymous, exponentially, and qualitatively different represent the kind of advanced vocabulary used in academic settings. Abstract concept manipulation. The speakers weren't just discussing facts, but exploring philosophical implications, comparing historical parallels, and engaging with theoretical frameworks. Nuanced disagreement. Rather than simple opposition, the professors showed how educated people disagree, acknowledging valid points while maintaining different perspectives.
Key academic vocabulary from this discussion. Central thesis. The main argument or position in an academic work. Robust evidence. Strong, reliable proof or data supporting a claim. Displacement phenomenon. The process by which one thing replaces another. Conflate. To combine or treat as the same when they should be considered separately. Synonymous. Having the same meaning or being equivalent. Exponentially. At an increasingly rapid rate. Profound questions. Deep, significant inquiries that challenge fundamental assumptions. Technological disruptions. Innovations that significantly change existing systems or industries. Qualitatively different. Different in essential character or nature, not just in degree. Renaissance. A period of renewed interest, growth, or development. Let's check your comprehension of this complex discussion. Question 1. What is Professor Williams' main disagreement with Professor Chen's thesis? She questions whether AI threatening commercial creative work necessarily threatens creativity itself, arguing that Chen conflates commercial work with creativity as a whole. Question 2. What historical example does Professor Williams use to support her argument? She mentions how photography's impact on painting led to Impressionism, and how jazz emerged from the intersection of recorded music and live performance. Question 3. How does Professor Chen counter Williams' optimistic view? He argues that the scale and speed of AI advancement is qualitatively different from previous technological shifts, involving systems that can mimic the entire creative process. Now, let's practice with an even more challenging academic discussion, a debate about urban planning and social psychology. Notice the interdisciplinary nature and rapid exchange of complex ideas. Dr. Rodriguez. The correlation between urban design and mental health outcomes is becoming increasingly undeniable. Yet, our city planning policies continue to prioritize economic efficiency over psychological well-being. It's a classic case of institutional inertia overriding empirical evidence. Dr. Patel. I appreciate your passion, Carlos, but I think you're oversimplifying the trade-offs involved. Municipal governments operate under severe budgetary constraints, and while the psychological benefits of green spaces and walkable neighborhoods are well documented, the implementation costs are substantial. Dr. Rodriguez. But that's exactly the short-sighted thinking I'm challenging. Yes, the upfront investment is significant, but numerous longitudinal studies demonstrate that communities with better urban design experience lower healthcare costs, reduced crime rates, and higher property values over time. Dr. Patel. Fair enough, though I'd argue the causation isn't as straightforward as you suggest. Wealthier communities tend to have both better urban planning and better health outcomes, but that correlation might reflect socio-economic factors rather than design impacts per se. Dr. Rodriguez. You're absolutely right to flag that confounding variable issue. However, recent experimental interventions in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, the High Line effect in New York, for instance, suggests that thoughtful urban design can indeed catalyze positive social change regardless of initial economic conditions. Dr. Patel. The High Line is an interesting case study, though critics would argue it's also contributed to gentrification and displacement of long-term residents. It exemplifies the complexity of urban interventions. They often produce unintended consequences alongside their intended benefits. Dr. Rodriguez. Absolutely valid criticism. It underscores the necessity of community engagement and equitable development practices. But surely the solution isn't to abandon urban design improvements altogether. It's to implement them more thoughtfully and inclusively. This discussion showcased even more advanced academic discourse features. Interdisciplinary thinking. The speakers connected urban planning, psychology, economics, and social policy in sophisticated ways. Statistical and research literacy. References to longitudinal studies, causation versus correlation, and confounding variables demonstrate academic research understanding. Nuanced policy analysis. Rather than simple pro-con positions, the speakers acknowledged multiple perspectives and unintended consequences. Advanced academic vocabulary. Institutional inertia. Organizations' tendency to resist change. Empirical evidence. Information based on observation and experimentation. Municipal governments. City-level political authorities. Longitudinal studies. Research that follows subjects over extended time periods. Per se. By itself. In and of itself. Confounding variable. A factor that might affect research results. Catalyze. To trigger or accelerate a process. Gentrification. The process of changing neighborhoods becoming more expensive. Unintended consequences. Results that weren't planned or anticipated. equitable development, fair and just community improvement practices. These academic discussions require you to process abstract concepts, follow complex reasoning, and understand specialized vocabulary, all hallmarks of advanced English comprehension. Now let's move into the corporate world with professional presentations and business strategy discussions. These conversations combine formal presentation skills with dynamic strategic thinking, requiring you to follow data analysis, understand business terminology, and track complex decision-making processes. Listen to this quarterly business review presentation where executives are analyzing market performance and planning future strategy. Pay attention to how they present data, discuss challenges, and debate strategic options. Emma as CEO. Thank you all for joining our Q3 review. Before we dive into forward-looking strategy, let's examine our performance metrics. Sarah, could you walk us through the key indicators? Certainly, Michael. Our revenue growth rate has decelerated from 18% year-over-year in Q2 to 12% in Q3. While this represents a slowdown, we're still outperforming industry benchmarks by approximately 300 basis points. That deceleration is concerning, particularly given our aggressive expansion investments this quarter. Our customer acquisition costs have increased by 23%, while customer lifetime value has remained relatively flat. The CAC increase is partly attributable to our premium market positioning strategy. We're deliberately targeting higher value customers, which requires more sophisticated marketing approaches and longer sales cycles. Understood, Jennifer, but we need to scrutinize whether this premium positioning is actually translating into sustainable competitive advantages. Are we seeing improved customer retention and higher average revenue per user? The data is mixed, frankly. Customer retention has improved marginally, up 2.3 percentage points, but ARPU growth has been disappointing, only 4% quarter over quarter, despite our premium pricing strategy. I'd like to propose that we're looking at this through too narrow a lens. Our operational efficiency metrics tell a more compelling story. We've reduced fulfillment costs by 15% while maintaining service quality, which should improve our margins significantly. David raises a valid point. Our gross margins have indeed expanded from 34% to 38% this quarter. The question becomes whether operational improvements can offset the marketing investment concerns we've discussed. Let's explore that further. What's our projected break-even timeline for the current marketing spend levels, assuming operational efficiency continues improving at the current trajectory? Based on our models, we're looking at break-even by Q2 next year, with positive ROI kicking in during Q3. However, this assumes several variables remain constant: market conditions, competitive dynamics, and continued operational optimization. I'd also add that our brand recognition metrics have improved substantially. While the financial impact isn't immediately visible, we're building long-term market position that should pay dividends in subsequent quarters. This business presentation demonstrates the sophisticated language of corporate strategy, quantitative analysis, the extensive use of percentages, metrics, and financial ratios shows how business discussions integrate numerical data. Strategic thinking. Participants didn't just report numbers, but analyzed their implications for future decision-making. Multi-perspective analysis. Each executive contributed their departmental expertise while considering company-wide implications.
Professional business vocabulary. Performance metrics. Measurable indicators of business success. Decelerated. Slowed down in terms of growth rate. Year over year. Compared to the same period in the previous year. Industry benchmarks. Standard performance measures for comparison within a sector. Basis points. 1/100th of a percentage point used in finance. Customer acquisition costs. CAC. Money spent to gain each new customer. Customer lifetime value. Total revenue expected from a customer relationship. Premium market positioning. Strategy of targeting high-end customers. Sustainable competitive advantages. Long-term benefits over competitors. Average revenue per user. ARPU. Revenue divided by number of customers. Fulfillment costs. Expenses related to completing customer orders. Gross margins. Revenue minus cost of goods sold, expressed as percentage. Break-even timeline. When revenue will equal expenses. Return on investment, ROI. Profit relative to investment cost. Let's check your comprehension of this business discussion. Question 1. How did the revenue growth rate change from Q2 to Q3? It decelerated from 18% to 12% year over year, though still outperforming industry benchmarks by 300 basis points. Question 2. What was the concern about customer acquisition costs? CAC increased by 23% while customer lifetime value remained flat, raising questions about marketing efficiency. Question 3. What positive operational change did the VP of Operations highlight? They reduced fulfillment costs by 15% while maintaining service quality, expanding gross margins from 34% to 38%. Now, let's listen to a more complex strategic planning discussion involving market expansion and risk assessment. Strategic Planning Director. Our market penetration analysis reveals significant untapped potential in the Southeast Asian markets, particularly Vietnam and Thailand. However, regulatory complexities and cultural adaptation requirements present substantial implementation challenges. Regional Manager. I've spent considerable time in those markets, and while the opportunity is genuine, we shouldn't underestimate the localization investments required. Consumer behavior patterns differ markedly from our current markets, and our value proposition may need fundamental restructuring. Risk management. From a risk perspective, we're looking at currency volatility, political instability factors, and nascent regulatory frameworks. Our stress testing suggests potential scenario outcomes ranging from 15% IRR in optimistic cases to negative returns under adverse conditions. CEO. Those are sobering projections, Amanda. How do these risk-adjusted returns compare to domestic market expansion alternatives? Strategic Planning Director. Domestic expansion offers more predictable returns. We're modeling 8 to 12% IRR with significantly lower volatility. However, the total addressable market is considerably smaller, limiting our long-term growth trajectory. Regional Manager. There's also the strategic consideration of competitive preemption. If we delay Southeast Asian entry, we risk ceding first-mover advantages to competitors who are already establishing market presence. Risk Management. True, but first-mover advantages can become first-mover disadvantages if market conditions aren't optimal. The telecommunications sector provides numerous examples of companies that expanded too aggressively into emerging markets. CEO, what if we pursued a phased approach, perhaps a pilot program in one market to validate our assumptions before committing to broader regional expansion?
This strategic discussion showcased advanced business planning concepts, market analysis sophistication, discussion of penetration rates, addressable markets, and competitive dynamics, risk assessment complexity, multiple risk factors, scenario modeling, and quantitative projections, strategic alternatives evaluation, comparing different expansion options with various trade-offs.
Advanced strategic vocabulary. Market penetration analysis. Study of how much of a market a company has captured. Regulatory complexities. Complicated government rules and requirements. Localization investments. Money spent adapting products for local markets. Value proposition. The benefit a company offers to customers. Currency volatility. Fluctuations in exchange rates. Nascent regulatory frameworks. New, still developing government rules. Stress testing. Analysis of performance under difficult conditions. Internal rate of return, IRR, a measure of investment profitability. Risk-adjusted returns, profits considering the probability of losses. Total addressable market, the maximum possible demand for a product. Competitive preemption, acting before competitors to gain advantages. First mover advantages, benefits of being first to enter a market. Phased approach, gradual implementation in stages. These business discussions require understanding complex financial concepts, strategic thinking, and sophisticated analytical vocabulary, essential skills for professional English comprehension. Now let's explore cultural conversations and social commentary, discussions about art, literature, social issues, and cultural phenomena that require understanding context, subtext, and cultural references. These conversations often involve personal opinions, cultural criticism, and sophisticated analysis of human behavior and society. Listen to this discussion between friends about a controversial art exhibition. Pay attention to how they express opinions, reference cultural knowledge, and navigate disagreement about sensitive topics. Emma as art critic, Alex. Intellectually engaged, slightly provocative. I have to say, the retrospective at the Modern Art Museum has been absolutely fascinating, though I understand why it's generating such polarized reactions. The curator's decision to juxtapose classical works with contemporary installations raises profound questions about artistic canonization and cultural authority. Emma as friend, Jordan. Thoughtful, slightly skeptical. I visited last weekend, and while I appreciate the curatorial ambition, I found some of the contemporary pieces felt forced, as if they were included primarily to make a political statement rather than because they genuinely belonged in dialogue with the classical works. Emma as art critic, Alex. Intellectually engaged. That's interesting criticism, Jordan, but couldn't one argue that art has always been inherently political? Even the so-called classical works we revere were products of their particular social and political contexts. We've just forgotten those contexts over time. Emma as friend, Jordan. Thoughtful. Fair point, though I think there's a distinction between art that emerges organically from political circumstances and art that's deliberately constructed to advance specific ideological positions. The former feels authentic, the latter can seem manipulative. Emma as art history, Sam. Joining conversation, academic perspective. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing your discussion. As someone who studies art history professionally, I find these debates about authenticity versus political intent somewhat artificial.
Most great art throughout history has been commissioned or created with explicit political purposes. Emma as art critic, Alex. Exactly, Sam. Think about Guernica or Goya's Disasters of War series, or even the Sistine Chapel, all explicitly political or religious propaganda, yet we don't question their artistic legitimacy today. Emma as friend, Jordan. But those examples feel different somehow. They emerged from artists' genuine responses to their historical moments, not from institutional pressure to be politically relevant. Emma as art history, Sam. I understand that intuition, but it might be romanticizing past artistic creation. Renaissance artists worked under enormous institutional pressure from the church and wealthy patrons. The idea of the purely autonomous artist is largely a modern invention. Emma as art critic, Alex. Which brings us back to the exhibition's central thesis, that our notions of artistic value and cultural significance are themselves constructed and contingent, not eternal or objective. Emma as friend, Jordan. I suppose my resistance isn't really to political art per se, but to art that feels didactic rather than exploratory. The best political art, it seems to me, raises questions rather than providing answers. This cultural discussion demonstrates sophisticated analytical conversation. Cultural knowledge application, references to specific artworks, historical periods, and artistic movements show how educated speakers draw on shared cultural literacy. Nuanced opinion expression. Rather than simple agreement or disagreement, speakers refined and qualified their positions throughout the conversation. Abstract concept manipulation, discussion of authenticity, artistic legitimacy, and cultural authority requires sophisticated conceptual thinking. Key cultural conversation vocabulary. Retrospective, an exhibition showing an artist's work over time. Polarized reactions, strongly divided opinions. Juxtapose, to place side by side for comparison or contrast. Artistic canonization, the process by which art becomes accepted as important. Cultural authority, the power to determine what's culturally valuable. Curatorial ambition, the curator's bold vision for organizing an exhibition. Inherently political, naturally or essentially involving politics. Ideological positions, specific sets of political or social beliefs. Manipulative, trying to influence people in a deceptive way. Commissioned, formally requested and paid for. Artistic legitimacy, recognition as valid or worthy art. Autonomous artist, an artist working independently without external influence. Contingent, dependent on circumstances, not absolute. Didactic, intended to teach or instruct, often in a preachy way.
Let's check your understanding of this cultural discussion. Question 1. What is Jordan's main criticism of the contemporary pieces in the exhibition? Jordan feels they were included primarily to make political statements rather than because they genuinely belonged in dialogue with classical works. Question 2. How does Sam challenge the idea of authentic versus political art? Sam argues that most great art throughout history was commissioned or created with explicit political purposes, and that the idea of a purely autonomous artist is largely a modern invention. Question 3. What distinction does Jordan make about good political art? Jordan suggests the best political art raises questions rather than providing answers, and feels exploratory rather than didactic.
Now let's listen to a discussion about social media's impact on human relationships, a conversation that requires understanding contemporary social issues and psychological insights. Emma, as sociologist, Dr. Kim, what troubles me most about our current digital communication landscape isn't necessarily the technology itself, but how it's reshaping fundamental human social behaviors. We're witnessing unprecedented changes in intimacy patterns, attention scans, and even empathy development. Emma, as tech worker, Maya. I work in tech, so I'm probably biased, but I think we're experiencing moral panic, similar to what happened with television, comic books, or even the printing press. Every transformative communication technology generates anxiety about its social implications. Emma, as journalist, Chris. But Maya, the scale and penetration of social media seems qualitatively different from previous media revolutions. We're not just consuming different content, we're fundamentally altering how we form and maintain relationships. Emma, as sociologist, Dr. Kim. Precisely, Chris. My research shows that young adults today report feeling lonelier despite having more connections than any previous generation. There's something paradoxical about technologies designed to bring us together actually increasing social isolation. Emma, as tech worker, Maya. That's concerning data, though I wonder if we're measuring the right things. Perhaps traditional metrics of social connection aren't adequate for understanding digital native relationship patterns. Emma, as journalist, Chris. That's a fascinating point. Are we potentially pathologizing normal evolutionary adaptation to new social environments? Emma, as sociologist, Dr. Kim. It's possible, though the mental health correlations are troubling. Increased rates of anxiety and depression, particularly among adolescents, correlate strongly with social media usage patterns. Emma, as tech worker, Maya. Correlation isn't causation, though. Perhaps social media use increases among people who are already struggling with mental health issues, because it provides accessible social connection when face-to-face interaction feels overwhelming. This social commentary showcased several sophisticated discourse features. Interdisciplinary perspective integration. Speakers brought insights from sociology, technology, journalism, and psychology. Hypothesis testing and conversation. Participants proposed theories and tested them against evidence and alternative explanations. Contemporary social analysis. Discussion required understanding current social phenomena and their historical context. Advanced social commentary vocabulary. Digital communication landscape. The current environment of online interaction. Unprecedented changes. Changes never seen before in history. Intimacy patterns, how people form close relationships. Empathy development, the growth of ability to understand others' feelings. Moral panic, widespread fear about perceived threats to social order. Transformative communication technology, technology that fundamentally changes how people communicate. Penetration, how deeply something spreads through society. Digital native, people who grew up with digital technology. Pathologizing, treating normal behavior as if it were a disease. Evolutionary adaptation, natural adjustment to new environments. Mental health correlations, statistical relationships between factors, and psychological well-being. These cultural conversations require you to understand contemporary social issues, follow complex arguments, and engage with abstract concepts, all hallmarks of advanced English comprehension. Now let's explore emotional and personal discussions, conversations that involve feelings, relationships, personal growth, and psychological insights. These discussions require understanding subtle emotional cues, implied meanings, and the sophisticated language people use to discuss internal experiences. Listen to this conversation between two close friends discussing a difficult life transition. Pay attention to how they express emotions, offer support, and navigate sensitive personal topics. I've been doing a lot of soul-searching lately about whether I made the right decision leaving my corporate job to pursue freelance writing. Some days I feel incredibly liberated and creative, but other days I'm consumed by self-doubt and financial anxiety. That sounds emotionally exhausting, Riley. Major life transitions are inherently destabilizing, even when they're positive changes. It's completely natural to experience that kind of internal conflict. I appreciate you saying that. Sometimes I feel like I should have it all figured out by now, especially since this was my choice. It's not like I was laid off or forced into this situation. I actively decided to upend my entire professional life. But that doesn't make the transition any less challenging. If anything, self-imposed changes can be more psychologically complex because you can't blame external circumstances. You have to sit with the uncertainty and take full responsibility for the outcomes. Exactly, and that's terrifying. When I was employed, I complained constantly about corporate bureaucracy and creative limitations, but at least I had predictable income and clear professional identity. Now I have creative freedom, but also complete financial insecurity. It sounds like you're grieving the loss of that security while simultaneously trying to embrace the possibilities of your new situation. That's an incredibly complex emotional process. You're essentially mourning one version of yourself while trying to birth another. That's such a beautiful way to put it. I hadn't thought about it as grief, but you're absolutely right. I am mourning my old professional identity, even though I chose to leave it behind. And grief isn't linear, right? Some days you'll feel excited about your creative projects. Other days you'll miss the simplicity of corporate life. Both feelings can coexist without negating each other. Thank you for normalizing this experience. I've been so hard on myself for not feeling consistently positive about a change I wanted to make. But you're helping me see that ambivalence might actually be a sign of psychological sophistication rather than weakness. This personal conversation demonstrates several key features of emotional discourse. Emotional vocabulary sophistication. Terms like soul-searching, consumed by self-doubt, emotionally exhausting, and ambivalence show advanced emotional expression. Psychological insight. Casey's analysis of grief, identity transition, and emotional complexity demonstrates sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Supportive communication patterns. Casey validates Riley's experience while offering new perspectives, showing skilled emotional support. Key emotional and personal vocabulary. Soul-searching. Deep self-reflection about important life decisions. Incredibly liberated, feeling very free and unrestricted. Consumed by, completely overwhelmed or dominated by something. Inherently destabilizing, naturally causing uncertainty or imbalance. Internal conflict, emotional struggle within oneself. Upend, to completely change or disrupt. Self-imposed changes, changes you choose to make yourself. Psychologically complex, involving complicated mental and emotional processes. Sit with uncertainty, to accept and tolerate not knowing what will happen. Grieving the loss, feeling sad about something that's gone. Simultaneously, at the same time. Mourning, feeling sad about a loss or ending. Birth another, create or develop a new version. Grief isn't linear. Sadness doesn't follow a straight, predictable path. Coexist, exist together at the same time. Negating, canceling out or making invalid. Normalizing, making something seem normal or acceptable. Ambivalence, having mixed feelings about something. Psychological sophistication, advanced emotional understanding and maturity.
Let's check your comprehension. Question 1. What conflicting emotions is Riley experiencing about their career change? Riley feels liberated and creative some days, but consumed by self-doubt and financial anxiety on others. Question 2. How does Casey explain